depending on which time zone you're in. We've got folks all the way from New Zealand over to America, all the time zones covered today. And I am pleased to announce this is part of our official 2026 Hit Points in History Conference. Now, in just a moment, I'll be introducing our first speaker, Sav Sood, for her presentation on video games, memory, and how we think of the ancient world. Sav is a first-year PhD student in classics at the University of Glasgow, studying the ways in which the ancient world is mediated through video games, specifically developer motivations and aims. She has a BA in classical archaeology and ancient history, and an MSc in archaeology from the University of Oxford. Outside of work, she runs Musketeer Productions, a theatre company that specializes in staging new writing all across the UK. Sav Sood, welcome to the stage.
Oh, this is so exciting. All right, I'm just going to share my presentation. There we go. All right, so today I'm going to be focusing on video games, ideas of cultural memory, and how we think of the ancient world. Like Dan said, I'm a PhD student based out of the University of Glasgow, and I'm having a really good time with that. I'm really enjoying the research, I'm really enjoying the work. So, the aims of today's presentations are to explore ideas from the field of memory studies and apply them to the study of video games based specifically in the classical world. And then also to reflect more broadly on the picture of the classical world we get sort of as presented in video games. So, what do I mean when we talk about memory studies? What do I mean when I talk about cultural memory? The fundamental idea is that no memory can preserve the past. What remains is only that which each society in every era can reconstruct within its contemporary frame of reference. So one of the spaces where cultural memory is preserved is within the media. And a particular theory that I enjoy applying and find very useful for the application and understanding of video games specifically is Alison Landsberg's theory of prosthetic memory from a 2004 book, Prosthetic Memory. So it's especially useful for understanding the impact of mass media on understanding the past because it was designed in relation to film and in relation to museums, into museum exhibitions. It was all these experiential sites, right? So Landsberg defines a prosthetic memory and says that they emerge at the interact between person and a historical narrative of the past at an experiential site. Within that moment of contact, an experience occurs through which the person sutures themselves into a moment of larger history. The idea there is that through these immersive experiences, a player is able to engage and interact with and understand and empathize with a version of the past, right? In short, video games allow us to experience things, or these media sites allow us to experience things that we otherwise would have no ways or aims of experiencing, right? While she was developing this for film and with immersive museum sites in mind, excuse me, I think video games as an immersive medium present a uniquely immersive opportunity, given that immersion is a chief aim of video game development. So it sort of provides an even richer prosthetic memory. You're experiencing things. I think we've all seen stories online of I played AC2 and then I could take my tour group around Italy with these ideas of like you're experiencing something you otherwise would have no contact with. So when it comes to the classical world, we've got some general trends in video games and perceptions. The classical world and the ancient world in general provides a really interesting space of both a lack of evidence in some ways, ways to interpret evidence, but also like it's so richly built into the culture that we live in and the culture we exist in. I'm in the UK. Classics departments here are separate to archaeology departments. They have their own space of prestige. So what I was thinking is, what are pop cultural perceptions of the ancient world? So I used the Paizomen database, which is just a tremendously helpful resource. I cannot recommend using it enough. I think Alexander Van der Waal is doing a talk later at this conference, but if he's here, thank you very much. It's a really useful database. It's got a list of effectively every game that is classical in setting or theme. So I used that information, I went through all sort of 400 games or so, and I split them up into setting and into theme. So in terms of the setting, I was looking at whether they were revolved around the Greek world, the Roman world, or multi-site. Something like Civilization would be a multi-site game where you can play as like a range of characters in that world. I also split them into historical and mythological. Now, these are broad categories, but I did see a sort of overwhelming trend, and that is that ancient Greece is associated with mythology and ancient Rome is associated with warfare. And a thing that is very interesting to me about this is that that was a prominent idea in ancient Roman thought. We have references in Horace and Ovid and Cicero to the Greeks being cultural and artistic and the Romans being militaristic. In Horace's epistles, we've got the line about rustic Greece captured savage Italy and introduced arts to Latium. And I find that it's a rich area to kind of investigate and to think about more broadly, because the thing with these multi-setting games, these multi-site games, or the things with the idea of reducing one of these cultures to being inherently militaristic and a different culture to being artsy is it's pervasive, but it's also, it lends itself to, without mincing my words, fascistic thinking, right? There is a reason that Mussolini traded so heavily on these images of Roman imperialism. There is a reason that there is a genre of troll account on the internet that uses ancient Roman thought. There is these ideas are entrenched and pervasive. And so it was interesting to see that very much reflected in the trends that we see in the development of video games that are based in the classical world. So these trends in video games aren't neutral. Given that video games are often, to quote from Draycott Cook, the first and fullest impression of the ancient world many people get, there is a much stronger chance for regressive or out-of-date ideas to be uncritically absorbed. An example of this, in my mind, is the 4X games, your Civs, your city builders, your expansionist games. They have social evolutionary ideas built into them, right? The idea that you start in one place and then you you discover science, and then from science you discover the nuclear bomb, and you've got your skill trees, which are kind of necessary from a design perspective. And I understand why they're there from a design perspective, because you want your players to feel as though they are evolving and as though they are unlocking new things. But I think what that risks doing is reducing some of the complexities of history, right? The reason this is a screenshot I put together yesterday, but if you search, and I'm realizing I put a typo in there, how cringe. But if you look up are the Isu, the fifth option down on Google autocomplete is real, right? I don't mean to mock, I suppose is the word I'm going to use here. But I think it's important for us as historical professionals to, one, meet people where they're at. There is popularity in games themed around the ancient world, but also to engage with what these games are saying about the ancient world and how people are responding to them. We often draw this line between accuracy and authenticity. Accuracy being historical fact, authenticity being the perception of what is true, the perception of what people believe to be true. And I think it's absolutely critical and important to understand that people's ideas of authenticity, it's a bit of an Ouroboros, right? Your ideas of the ancient world come from pop culture because you don't tend to study them in school. I think, at least in the UK, studying the ancient world is often relegated to primary school, especially if you're state educated. So your ideas come from pop culture, right? Your ideas of the ancient world. That's normally your gateway into some of these areas, unless you go to a particularly posh school, generally. But what we need to do then is engage with developers and kind of meet them where they're at, but also think very critically about what we've got, what is being presented within these games. So what are my general conclusions? It's obviously quite a short presentation, but video games have the ability to shape perspectives on the past, and concepts from memory studies can help us give us appropriate frameworks for understanding these perspectives. They can give us useful sort of analytical tools for understanding some of these perspectives. Video game perspectives on the ancient world can be both limited and limiting. This isn't universally true. I have spent most of this week writing up about an educational game, Danger on Pompeii, that was a lot of fun. The aim was to provide interesting pedagogical information. But like this also doesn't mean that these games are bad. I love the Civ franchise as a player. I enjoy them. I think they're good and satisfying games to play. I enjoy AC Odyssey. I think it's a fun game to play, but we still need to engage with the perspectives that they are presenting on the ancient world. And it also, it's we need to be able to combat incorrect information, but you're not going to do that by sending out a fact sheet, right? You're not going to be able to do that by telling people that the thing you love is wrong and the thing you love is terrible. I think the thing that is much more effective is to work with developers and engage with them to help shift these narratives in order to tell more rounded stories in about our shared cultural history. That's all from me. So for my references, I'm very happy to send this around later. And I'd be happy to hear any questions. Thank you very much.
Well, I'll first give a round of applause here. Oh. Julie, if you have a question, please go ahead and step up here. For anyone else who has a question in the audience, we have a little white box you'll see in the upper right that says Q&A. If you can just step on this, you'll see a little orange speaker icon like you could be seeing from me. You're speaking to the whole room. So, Julie, if you have our first question, please step on up. Julie, you can step over to the left a little bit. You're not broadcasting yet.
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, Sav. That was wonderful. I was actually just coming up here to introduce the Q&A ourselves. So thanks, Dan. And if you want to give us the first question, I think we have several. Looks like we've got some folks lining up. I'll go first. A little bit of chaos early in the morning. Technical difficulties. So I think about this a lot, and I think a lot of our Kyo gamers do, living in this space where, you know, we love Assassin's Creed, and then we think about, you know, the actual gameplay of it, or, you know, Civ and who gets to be a barbarian, or, you know, all of these various things. And I was wondering if, in addition to the problematic faves, if you do have any favorite games that you feel do a good job representing particular parts of antiquity.
I'm so glad you asked this. So not for antiquity in general, but my master's thesis, I was a maritime archaeologist before this, and one of my case studies for my master's thesis was Lucas Pope's Return of the Obra Dinn, which, as well as being, in my mind, one of the best games of all time, is such a fantastic reference for life at sea in Golden Age of Sail, but also for incorporating a lot of these mythological, non-naturalistic elements that were so pertinent to like belief in life in the life at sea. It's such a fantastic game. So that's the first thing I'd recommend. The second game I'd really recommend is Pentiment by Obsidian, which is just another absolutely fabulous game, which is set in the early modern period in Bavaria, and you play as an artist on his Wanderjahre, and it you can tell that Josh Sawyer from Obsidian loves history. You can tell that he loves it. You can tell that he cares about it. I think there are games that have been made where people care. I think sometimes outside of this space, I feel a bit like I'm preaching to the choir if I talk about it here, but outside of the space, I feel like there's an understanding that video game, you just kind of dismiss them out of hand. That is the general, I've come across that a lot when explaining my research, at least. And so I think putting forward, you know, what, as Chapman would call them, the developer historians, allowing those people in the space is just so, it's just so wonderful. I think you can make really good games and you can communicate certain like Pentament's really good at explaining deconstructivist ideas of history, and I think more effective than practically anything else that I've played or seen. But yeah, so those would be my recommendations: Obra Dinn and Pentiment.
All right, do we have a next question? Come on up to the mic.
Yeah. All right, I'll ask one. I'm just doing a bit of work at the minute on using historical games in museum spaces. Now, you've talked about several games as well, and I just wanted to know, one, whether you had seen, heard, or just had any thoughts about the use of Assassin's Creed in the Ashmolean Museum. I know they used there was that exhibit, I think it was like Knossos, Myth, Reality, and something. So just based on your presentation today, I was just curious, like, if you could see something like that else done, but maybe a different non-Assassin's Creed game, what would you like to see done, and like what with it? What would it be? The narrative? Would it be kind of showcasing the world, or anything like that?
Oh, that's a great question. You're asking questions that I have lots of thoughts about, which is always lovely. So I went to the Knossos exhibition. I also went to the Alexander the Great exhibition they did at the British Library, The Myth and the Making. And then both of those, what Ubisoft did was they had these moments of you went in and there's projection mapping. So based on your movements, the world around, like an animation changes, the world around you changes. They did a lovely thing with the Alexander sarcophagus, where this is a projection, but you can see it and they're using graphics from the game. Now, I think we do need to be kind of careful when we're dealing with some of these things. I think that if there was a historical equivalent to greenwashing, I feel like Ubisoft does tend to do that in the cultural sector. So this is where I put my theatre brain on, because I love a lot of what they do, but I love the ideas conceptually. I feel quite strongly that they don't always do them very carefully. Like the projection mapping is often bad, to not mince my words. And it is possible to do good projection mapping, and it is possible to do engaging. I would love to see something very similar to what we've seen in Knossos or Alexander, but where you care more about the implementation. I think that would be the thing to me that I would love to see. I do enjoy the ideas though of like bringing in some of these immersive experiences. I think it would be really effective if you were doing an exhibition on say the music of the ancient world, something like that. If you were looking at like creating soundscapes would be really effective. One of my colleagues at Glasgow, Dr. Lizzie Robertson, she's done a lot of really interesting work on creating soundscapes in a lot of these heritage spaces, and things like that, to just make that experience slightly richer and slightly more sensorily engaging, but also to follow through well enough. I think if you're going to like consider the realities of the space and then also engage with people perhaps in the like creative world and like the art world and theatre world, bringing people in who have specific training in those sorts of areas, because if you don't do that, I think you're missing out on some of the effectiveness. But like something like have you had the Burnt City?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, it's the Punch Drunk Theatre. They do a lot of immersive theatre stuff. They did this whole take on the Iliad that was you would wander around and engage with different actors, and you'd see different versions of the story depending on where you were guided. And I think there would be space for something like that in a museum exhibit as well. Something that is immersive, something that is slightly gamified, and just you doing something to participate. I was just at the Welcome quite recently, because you're based in Bristol, right? Let's say, yeah. I was in the Welcome quite recently, and they have the exhibition on clean water. And one space, you've got these iPads that effectively that you can pick up and move around. And as you move them around, you can see different things pop up around you. And it was just this wonderful way to get you slightly more engaged and slightly more in it. I think there's a lot of ground there. That sounds like really interesting research.
Nice. Well, thank you. I'm gonna let other people ask. Yeah, and then I'll catch you later.
So I had a quick question here. Obviously, you're talking a lot about how to interact with developers. Can you say a little bit about maybe any guidance on getting into the modding community?
Mm. That is so. The modding community is something that I know as a modder, as someone who has helped make games. I think that's more where I know less. I've done less academic work on it, but I do think engaging with there are some articles I can think of where people have engaged with modding of like an active transformative practice, but also the ideas of the Rome total realism mod has been written about quite extensively. I feel like there are quite a few good articles on that. I'm sorry to just give you a reading list here because it's not something I'm super well versed in. But I do think it's an interesting, a similar thing as I do think about like fan engagement with different media. So I really enjoyed. I hoping to talk to some people once ethics approvals, once I finish filling out the forms for my ethics approvals, who have been engaged with fanzines and creating things around Pentiment, because I do really enjoy that idea of people who are, you've got this range of people. It's either people who love something so much that they want to work on it and like create transformative media about it, or they want more of it. I feel like that's a core proponent of modding. Or there are things in it where they think it can be better. So like Rome Total Realism, it's for people who want things to be even more historically quote unquote accurate. Now, a thing that I didn't touch on in my 15-minute presentation was its access to information is like a huge part of the issue, especially when it comes to classical text. A lot of things are available online, a lot of commentary is available online. It's fairly easy to find a copy of something like Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, things like that. But the problem is up-to-date scholarship, accessible scholarship is paywalled. And that's a big problem. So I got to interview Lucas Pope as part of my master's thesis, and he was saying that, you know what, it was expensive. And he had he's a fairly successful developer, he had the luxury to go to the UK and do the research. But he was like, at a certain point, you just have to stop because you can sink all of your time and your money into it. And I think sometimes it's something people are aware of, but I'm sometimes guilty of forgetting that like not everyone has institutional access to things. You know, not everyone has institutional access to journal articles and scholarship, or is comfortable enough to get in touch with academics, even if academics will respond. You know, a lot of I chatted to people because I was working as a barista during my master's, and I was chatting to a lot of people who had an interest in history and had an interest in archaeology, and who kind of didn't realize that you can just get in touch with people about their research. There's no guarantee they'll reply, but they probably will, knowing academics, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's important as well.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
I think we have time for one more question. Samuel, if you want to go ahead.
All right. So, hello. I am impressed by how I think I found kind of my lost sister in this kind of thesis because I am carrying a very similar topic, but on the reception of the ideas of the ancient world, in this case, applied to science fiction and fantasy and the creation of world building. And I am really interested. I've been really interested in memory studies. I've always tried to get into it, but I haven't yet. So this is very enlightening for me. So that's wonderful. So thank you for the presentation. And so my question is kind of very short, and also considering the time we have. So you've mentioned how there's a more militaristic idea surrounding Rome. I've also detected that in my thesis in a more parallel areas such as like science fiction and fantasy, in Greece in the case of culture and mythology. There's also this article, not it was a whole book by Ross Clare that talks about that in the
the transmedia one.
Yes,
yeah,
it's wonderful. It talks about that in the terms of Greece associated with the feminine and Rome with the masculine.
Yes.
It's very good. I also, so in this line, I wanted to ask you, have you detected any other pervasive or common ideas surrounding the reception of these two
I'm so glad you brought this up because I initially had a slide that said Greece is for girls, Rome is for boys, and I have cut that for time and for relevance. But I am very interested in these gendered ideas, but also the idea that Greece, that it's queer in some way. Like the Greek world is queer, and then the Roman world isn't. I think that's something that I find really interesting. I remember a thing that people would say at undergrad, which is if you're talking to a classics student, they're either like a queer feminist or the most conservative man you've ever met. And that was like a really pervasive thought, pervasive idea. I think the idea of the Roman Empire is very ordered and structured and sanitary. I find that really interesting, the idea that it's clean and organized. I'm like, that's not how spatial organization works. That's not how people work. And so I think there are lots of ideas that, again, we get these retroactive, very Victorian ideas. I could talk a lot about, I'm sure we could talk a lot about Victorian ideas of the classical world and how when you're studying antiquity, so much of what you're doing is pushing back against a lot of these quite regressive ideas that we've just inherited from the Victorians, sometimes uncritically. There's a lot there. I think the main ones are obviously these gendered lines, the lines on sexuality, so queerness, and then also the glory and success of the Roman Empire and how that is read in other spaces. I think there is a lot of political ground there. But yes, it could be a whole thesis in and of itself. But
I think we're going to have to cut that off there, although I hope you can continue this conversation off screen. We do need a couple minutes break before the next speaker, but Sav, thank you so much. This was a really wonderful talk and a really wonderful discussion. And thank you to all of our question askers. What a fabulous time.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone's got any questions about the research or the work, feel free to drop me an email. It's all, I'm always happy to chat about it. Thank you.